نظر سے حسن مجازی گرا دیا تم نے گلے کی خشک رگوں کو کٹا دیا تم نے گلے کی خشک رگوں کو کٹا دیا تم نے چراغ دین محمد جلا دیا تم نے حسین کعبے کو کعبہ بنا دیا تم نے جہاں میں رنگے صلوات پڑھ دیجیے عروج بجنوری صاحب کے سلام کی چند شعر پیش خدمت ہے. حسین قرض ادا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں حسین فرض ادا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں یزیدیت کو فنا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں حسین فرض ادا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں حسین دے کے 72 سروں کی قربانی حسین دے کے 72 سروں کی قربانی خدا کا شکر ادا کر رہے ہیں خدا کا شکر ادا کر رہے ہیں حیات دین محمد کو اے مسلمانوں بوقت عصر عطا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں ثواب تے اثر عطا کر رہے ہیں سجدے زمانے والوں یہ صبر حسین تو دیکھو کہ دشمنوں کا بھلا کر رہے ہیں سجدے لائی کی کند چھری چل رہی تھی گردن پر مگر حسین دعا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں مگر حسین دعا کر رہے ہیں مقطع سے پہلے ایک شعر یہ امتی ہیں کہ پڑھ کر رسول کا کلمہ سر حسین جدا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں سر حسین جدا کر رہے ہیں مقطع پہ شکن عروج خون سے اپنے حسین ابن علی زمین کو خاک شفا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں زمین کو خاک شفا کر رہے ہیں سجدے میں حسین فاتحہ مسافران مصیبت وطن میں آتے ہیں مسافران مصیبت وطن میں آتے ہیں سفر سے آتے ہیں سوغات آہ لاتے ہیں سفر سے آتے ہیں سوغات آہ لاتے ہیں بجائے اشک وہ آنکھوں سے خون بہاتے ہیں اٹھا کے ہاتھ مدینے کو یہ سناتے ہیں اٹھا کے ہاتھ مدینے کو یہ سناتے ہیں کٹا کے آئے ہیں زہرا کہ سب گھرانے کو نہ کر قبول تو ہم بے کسوں کے آنے کو نہ کر قبول تو ہم بے آنے کو مدینہ ہم تیرے والے کو آئے ہیں کھو کر مدینہ گردن شبیر پر چلا خنجر مدینہ کوفے میں سرنا گے ہم پھرے در در مدینہ داغ رسن ہے ہمارے شانوں پر مدینہ داغ رسن ہے ہمارے شانوں ہم آئے ہیں زندہ پا زہرا کا نور عین نہیں مدینہ اکبر و قاسم نہیں حسین نہیں ہم آئے ہیں زندہ پا زہرا کا نور عین نہیں مدینہ اکبر و قاسم نہیں حسین مدینہ اکبر و قاسم نہیں چلا بشیر یہ دیتا ہوا خبر ہر جا مگر محلہ حاشے میں دیکھتا ہے کیا کہ ایک مریضہ سرے راہ ہے کھڑی تنہا جو نام پوچھا تو رو رو کہ بولی وہ صغرا جو نام پوچھا تو رو رو کہ بولی وہ صغرا بشیر کہنے لگا کیوں تو شور و شین میں ہے کہا یہ حال میرا فرقت حسین میں ہے کہا یہ حال میرا فرقت حسین میں ہے بشیر سمجھا یہ حسین ہے صغرا بشیر سمجھا یہ بنت حسین ہے صغرا خاموش رہ گیا صغرا کہ منہ پہ کچھ نہ کہا پکاری فاطمہ گردہ میں دیکھ کالے عزا تو بھائی لایا ہے کس کی سنا نہیں مجھ کو سنا تو بھائی لایا ہے کس کی مجھ کو سنا وہ بولا قاصد بیمار کربلا ہوں میں سنانی خبر پیغمبر پہلے چلا ہوں میں سنانی خبر پیغمبر پہلے چلا ہوں میں وہ بولی رو رو کے بھائی سناتا ہے وہ کون ہے جسے بیمار تو بتاتا ہے سنانی کس کی ہے یہ کو یہ حال آتا ہے کہ مصطفیٰ کی لحد سے تو کہنے جاتا ہے کہ مصطفیٰ کی لحد سے
کہنے جاتا
ہے امامہ پھینک کے اس نے کہا دہائی ہے تیرے حسین کی صغرا سنانی آئی ہے تیرے حسین کی صغرا سنانی آئی آخری بشیر کہتا ہے واللہ روزہ کانپ گیا لہر سے نالا ہوا واہ حسین کا پیدا ادھر زمین پر تپتی تھی فاطمہ صغرا زنان ہاشمیہ نے وہاں ہجوم کیا زنان ہاشمیہ نے وہاں
ہجوم کیا
ہلا کے شانہ کہا شاہ مشرق نائے اٹھو حسین کی آشے اٹھو حسین اٹھو حسین کی آشے اٹھو حسین آئے مسافران مصیبت وطن میں آتے ہیں
اب میں بلا تاخیر ہمارے ہیوسٹن کے نوجوان عالم دین جناب رضا جعفری صاحب سے درخواست کرتا ہوں کہ ممبر پہ تشریف لائیں اور امام مظلوم کے فضائل و مصائب بیان کریں پانی آ جائے گا گلاس میں صحیح ہے
پارے دیگے صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ. For all mu'mineen and mu'minat, especially شہداء ملت جعفریہ, فاتحہ. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم الحمد للہ الرحمن الرحیم مالک یوم الدین اهدنا الصراط المستقیم صراط الذین غیر المغضوب. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. الحمد للہ رب العالمین والصلاة والسلام على سیدنا ونبینا وصفینا ومولانا ابا القاسم محمد. اللہم صل علی محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على قوم الظالمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Our topic of discussion is pertaining to Ahl al-Bayt and Azadari or Aza. And so before we get into this topic pertaining to Aza and the importance that the Ahl al-Bayt specifically prescribed for Imam al-Hussein and remembering him, there's a few introductory discussions that we must have to get a further or a better understanding of just exactly why was there such a significance on Aza. The first thing is related to the creation of human beings themselves. As in the way that human beings have been created by Allah Azza wa Jal, they require certain criteria for its growth. That's the first thing. Then after that, we want to look at, for example, how did the status of the Ahl al-Bayt themselves. Meaning when the Ahl al-Bayt say something, essentially it is ingrained within reality. It is ingrained within haqiqah. And then from that moment onwards, once we establish these 2 points, we can go further and understand just exactly when the Ahl al-Bayt stress on the importance of Aza from the Prophet all the way up to the 12th Imam and other Anbiya as well, it'll click, right? So the first thing is, when we look at a human being, recite a salawat. When we look at a human being, right, if you go within history, you see that the Ahl al-Bayt is heavily emphasized on du'as and ziyarah. This is within our Shia Hadith corpus, is that whenever and wherever there was an Imam and the companions would go up to him, the Imams would teach them du'as. They would teach them ziyarats. And within these ziyarats, within these du'as, you would see that the Ahl al-Bayt were teaching individuals. For example, after Karbala, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was alive for 35 years, correct? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Meaning Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he was alive for 35 years. And among the things that he was doing was that he was teaching du'as, he was reciting du'as. Sayfa Sajjadiyah that we have. But simultaneously what you see is that the Imam would have servants. One of the ways that the Imam was spreading the religion, Maktab Ahl al-Bayt, is that he would have servants, he would purchase them, and then he would raise them. And these du'a would serve a purpose for them. As in within these du'as, along with the other things that the Imam was teaching the servants, it was the ma'arif of the Ahl al-Bayt. And you see from the very beginning, from the time of the Prophet and Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Imam Hassan, and Imam Hussein, and so on and so forth, the Ahl al-Bayt places great significance on du'as, on ziyarats. Why? Because it is ingrained within the human nature that they seek du'as. They require ziyarats. For example, when you go to Karbala, you feel the difference within yourself. As soon as you enter the haram, the presence of the Ahl al-Bayt has a significant impact on you as a person. Do you see? Why is it that way? Or for example, if you go in the Quran, if you go to Surah Maryam, within Surah Maryam you see that Hazrat Zakaria, if you go through tafasir, you see that Hazrat Zakaria, he was responsible for taking care of baby Maryam. Salamullah alayha. And one day he walks in, she's in the mihrab, she's busy worshipping. And Hazrat Zakaria, what he sees is that there's provisions, there's rizq, there's food provided for her. And so Hazrat Zakaria, who's a prophet, who's a Nabi, he asks Bibi Maryam that where did you get this from? Like where did this come from? So Bibi Maryam, she responded back to him saying, this is provided to me by my Lord. This is provided to me by Allah Azza wa Jal. And so in Surah Maryam, you see that now when this incident happens with Prophet Zakaria, the ayats explain that now Prophet Zakaria, he calls out to Allah Azza wa Jal. And he starts doing a dua. And he starts praying. And he starts invoking Allah Azza wa Jal. Do you see? Anbiya, awliya, the Prophet, Ahl al-Bayt, all of them emphasizing on what du'as and ziyarats. Why? It's because the human nature, the way it is, requires these du'as and ziyarats. They require guidance. They require nabuwah. They require prophethood. They require the Ahlul Bayt and what they teach us. Now this nature that we're talking about goes back to the fitrah, the natural order that the human being has. Now, for the youngsters, we'll go step by step. When we look at the outside world, we're looking at the body that is confined by time and space, laws of biology, laws of anatomy and physiology, laws of physics. Simultaneously, there's a creation of mind, a dimension of mind which is referred to as the soul, ruh. You guys know this. And as a result, that soul that exists within me exists within its own realm. For example, the body exists over here in this physical world. The soul exists in its own immaterial realm. Now, what happens is that if I go up to, for example, near a fire, or if someone comes and takes a knife and stabs me, what's going to happen to me? I'll get injured. Why? Because the natural order of my physical body is such that it has do's and don'ts. That if somebody comes along and lights me on fire, for instance, or somebody stabs me with a knife, my physical body is unable to withstand the effects of that which is dangerous for me. The fire will burn me, the knife will cut me, and I'll get injured. I'll get deformed in a way. Why? The natural order of my physical body is such that it can't withstand the fire and the stabbing and so on and so forth. Simultaneously, I do the exact opposite. I'll go and provide comfort for my body. So engineers and scientists and all this research that happens all around the world for the comfort of the human being and protect them from that which harms the physical body, they'll invest millions and if not billions of dollars, correct? Why? The natural order of the human body dictates how we're going to live our life. And so these materialists, for example, atheists, or those who focus on the physical aspect of this world, they will heavily focus on the laws of that which are superficial. But simultaneously, then we have the soul. We have the immaterial existence of a human being. And just like the human body, that natural soul, that soul has a natural order, has do's and don'ts. That set of rules that basically helps it grow or damages it. Now, when the Ahlul Bayt come forward and they're teaching you these du'as and these ziyarats and essentially explaining to you what religion is, the do's and don'ts within the Sharia, within the religion of Islam, is basically for the immaterial soul that helps it grow. Meaning what? Just like how the fire will deform my body, the sins that exist goes against the natural order of my soul. Do you see? So when the Ahlul Bayt, for example, they say ghiba is not allowed. Ghiba, backbiting, is haram. In the Quran you have the example where Allah Azza wa Jalla says that if you do ghiba, ghiba is like you're eating the dead corpse of your brother. Now question, if I go along and do ghiba of somebody, literally, right now, as I speak, am I literally eating a dead corpse? No. So then what is the correlation between me saying ghiba, me backbiting against somebody, and eating a dead corpse? And this is an ayah as well. Nobody can denounce this. Nobody can deny this. What is the correlation between me saying something bad about somebody else and eating a dead corpse? So essentially, the way the ulama try to explain this is that the effects of the ghiba is as disgusting, as harmful as you would see somebody eating a dead corpse. You're not literally eating a dead corpse, but ghiba, its reality is such that it's going against the natural order of your soul, such that once you do this sin, it's deforming your human soul. It's deforming your actual self. Do you see? Simultaneously, for example, the Ahlul Bayt say, do something good, do something that is wajib, help the orphans, give sadaqah. Those are those rules and the things that you must do that will help that natural order of the human soul grow. Do you see? And so when we talk about the Ahlul Bayt, when we say, for example, they're the perfect and the greatest of the creation of Allah Azza wa Jal, we're saying that these individuals, when we say they're Nurun Wahid, they're one Nur, they're the closest to Allah Azza wa Jal. Meaning when they're Tahir, and they're made Tahir, and when they're Ma'asum, and they have Isma, they have infallibility, meaning they're at the very top in terms of reality, and all that is created at the very top. And Allah Azza wa Jal chooses them as a result of their purification to help those like myself get closer to Allah Azza wa Jal by explaining the natural order of the human soul and that which harms it and that which protects it. Do you see? One of the ways that somebody can reform themselves, protect the soul, help it grow, is ziyaras and du'as. Do you see now? Is that the Ahlul Bayt, they'll come along, for example, somebody comes up to one of the Imams, and they'll ask, for example, what should I do? The Imam, for example, will teach them a dua. And so there's a dua literally for everything. When you go to the bathroom, there's a dua. When you go to the masjid, there's a dua. When you're studying, there's a dua. When you're about to pray salah, salah itself is like a dua, but there's a dua for that as well. Ahlul Bayt taught us that. Why? Because you see all of these du'as, all these jarats, everything that they have taught us, essentially it helps you get closer to the Ahlul Bayt themselves. Why? Because the human nature, the human soul requires it. If you want to get closer to the Ahlul Bayt, you act upon that which they teach you. Ziyara, du'a, wajib, halal, so on and so forth. And as an individual begins to reform themselves, protect them from the harms of a sin that goes against the natural order of the human body, of the human soul, they automatically get what? They automatically get closer and closer to the Ahlul Bayt. They get closer and closer to Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Prophet Allah Azza wa Jal. Do you see? So within the natural order, the way that we've been created, the Ahlul Bayt taught us du'as and ziyarats for our own growth. So we get closer to them. That's the first step. Now, if we want to understand the relationship between the Aza and the Ahlul Bayt, we're trying to figure that out for those who came a bit late. These are the preliminary steps that we need to speak about. The reality of a human being in a summary, basically. So one is that we have a natural order, the human soul, and the Ahlul Bayt teaches the ziyarah, the du'as, and everything else for the purification of the soul, so it gets closer to the Ahlul Bayt. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is, for example, there's somebody who came up to Imam Hadi alayhi salam. And the Imam is asked by this companion a few things. And as a result, the Imam then teaches him a few things. He teaches him a ziyarah. And within this ziyarah, the Imam essentially explains the fadila, the greatness of the Ahlul Bayt themselves. Now this is where the conversation might get a bit technical, but inshallah we'll go step by step. One or two of these lines within this ziyarah, the Ahlul Bayt, the Imam explains about himself and the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt is this. He says, peace be upon the family of prophethood. And then he says these two lines. He says that the Ahlul Bayt, they're ma'adan al-rahmah. They're the core of mercy. And then he says that they're mahbit al-wahi. Mahbit is that destination, that place where wahi comes down. That's the Ahlul Bayt. Wahi, when it comes down, it's that place where the Ahlul Bayt are. Ahlul Bayt is that destination. Ahlul Bayt is that place where wahi is coming down. Now the question becomes, when wahi is coming down, I thought it was only for the Prophet. I thought Rasulullah was the only one, or the Anbiya would get the wahi. So what is this wahi that the Imam is talking about? And so the discussion becomes, essentially, what is wahi to begin with? Can we prove this from the Quran? Did someone who was not a Ma'asum or a Nabi get wahi? Is it the same type of wahi? Is it a different type of wahi? What is it? And so over here, if we were to look at wahi in its lexical meaning, as in what did the Arabs mean when they use the term wahi? Wahi would be essentially anything that's like a swift message. Quickly relaying a message. That is called wahi. Correct? And when the Anbiya, when they would get wahi, essentially what would happen is that this wahi, this revelation, this message from Allah Azza wa Jal would come on the existence of the Anbiya. And no one else would see it. And because again, it's landing, it's coming on the souls of the Anbiya, there's no time there. So how you would imagine, for example, time, me moving from one place to another, it took me 5 seconds. Over there, that swiftness, that quickness of the wahi is such that that message is immediately given to the Anbiya, to the prophets, from Allah Azza wa Jal. And so you have an example of this, for example, that within history, if you study the sciences of Quran, ulum al-Quran, there's a discussion where they have narrations in which the Prophet, he would be sitting on a horse or a donkey or a mule or an animal, and a wahi would come down. And as soon as that wahi would come down, there would be no intermediary between Allah Azza wa Jal and the existence of the Prophet. Meaning Hazrat Jibreel is not the one bringing the wahi. This is directly from Allah Azza wa Jal onto the existence of the Prophet. This revelation, when it would come down, they would say that people would observe that the animal that the Prophet was sitting on, it would begin to go down to the point that the stomach of the animal would touch the ground. Meaning the pressure and the burden of the wahi was such that even the animal couldn't withstand it. And so as a result, there were times that the Prophet would be tired after wahi. Why? Because the kalam, the revelation of Allah Azza wa Jal, is descending directly on the existence of the Prophet. Simultaneously, for example, when the Prophet was going for Mi'raj, and he was going towards Allah Azza wa Jal, there was a time, for example, there was a limit where Hazrat Jibreel was with him, and the ayah of the Quran says there was a limit. That Hazrat Jibreel, now from that point onwards, he couldn't go with the Prophet. He couldn't withstand the greatness or the pressure or the intensity of those realms of existence where the Prophet was going towards. And so Hazrat Jibreel, he came up to the Prophet and he said, listen, I can't go any further. This is beyond my scope. And so the Prophet said, you're going to leave me alone? He's like, beyond this, no one else has reached these levels that now you're about to embark upon. And when the Prophet continued to do su'ud, as in going upward towards Allah Azza wa Jal, there was no intermediary between the Prophet, the existence of the Prophet, and Allah Azza wa Jal. And so when we're talking about this wahi, that this wahi comes down directly on the existence of the Prophet, is that he is so close to God that he doesn't require an intermediary. He's the greatest creation of God. And so this is the first type of wahi that we're talking about. That a wahi that would descend upon the Anbiya directly from Allah Azza wa Jal onto the Prophet. Another example that you can look at, for example, is through an intermediary. So in the Quran you have Prophet Musa. Prophet Musa, after he had spent some time, he was living with Fir'aun when he was a child. Then he had left and fled and went towards Prophet Shu'aib. He got married there. He spent 8 to 10 years there. And then after that, he was returning back to some place where he saw a fire in a cave, ayah of the Quran. And when he went into the cave to get the fire, Allah Azza wa Jal, through the intermediary, he got wahi. So the first wahi is non-stop, as in there's no intermediary, such as the Prophet, the example of Mi'raj. And then the second one is where the Anbiya would get wahi through an intermediary. And then there's a third one, for example, Hazrat Jibreel would come to the Prophet and he would explain to him exactly the revelation. He would tell them what the revelation of Allah Azza wa Jalla is, and he would give it to the Prophet, and the Prophet would then go and get it to the people. Right? Now the question becomes this, is that in this ziyarah, when the Ahl al-Bayt are saying that the Ahl al-Bayt are the destination of the wahi, well, what does that mean? Which wahi is that? Which wahi is that? Is it the intermediary one, or is it something different? Or is there a difference between the wahi that the Anbiya would get and the one that the Imam is talking about over here? And so after research, the way that the scholars explain this, is that the Ahl al-Bayt would get wahi as well. But the difference is this, is that the wahi that would descend upon the Prophet, on the heart of the Prophet, on the existence of the Prophet, it was basically the Quran, it was the miracle. It was the completion or the propagation of religion. And once it was finished, that type of wahi that was specifically for the Prophet was done. Example of this, or dalil, or evidence for this is this. For example, in Bihar al-Anwar, we have a riwayah from the Imams themselves. And it says that Hazrat Jibreel will come down to the Prophet. And he said, this is, for example, the last wahi that was being brought down. Hazrat Jibreel said to them that after this, I will not come. The chapter of prophethood is closing. Riwayah. The Ahlul Bayt taught us this. And so what does that mean? If the Prophet Jibreel is not coming back down, what does that mean? And so the way that it's explained is that he's not coming down again for that prophetic wahi that he was talking about. Not the wahi that the Ahlul Bayt got. Do you see? There's a difference. Simultaneously, for example, Nahj al-Balagha in other riwayats, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would explain that when the Prophet had passed away, among the things that was closed for us and that we lost besides the Prophet was that the doors of wahi were closed. But again, which type of wahi? The wahi that was specifically designed for Rasulullah. That Sharia that we're talking about. The Mujda that we're talking about. Do you see? But now once we go further and look into the types of wahi, the one that the Ahlul Bayt would get, which one is that? Is that angels would descend down on the Ahlul Bayt. Why? Because they're among the greatest creation of Allah Azza wa Jal. They would come down with that message. What's the difference? The difference is this, is that the Prophet completed the religion. And hence he would get that type of wahi. But the Ahlul Bayt would explain the religion and they would get that type of ilham and wahi. That which the Prophet left behind, Quran and Itrati, Taqalain, the angels would descend down on the Ahlul Bayt and they would essentially explain that which the Prophet had left behind. The religion of the Prophet, the right interpretation of it. For example, sometimes we have within our riwayas in regards to tafsir, is that the Imam Bargah al-Islam, he would be approached by some of the companions. And someone would ask, hey, listen, in regards to this ayah, just exactly what does it mean? We can't figure it out. The Imam would say the response to your questions isn't just one word. For example, ard. Ard means earth. It's like the secret or the description or the explanation of that ayah is found in one word. You can't find this anywhere else. No one can explain this anywhere else except for those who are chosen by Allah Azza wa Jal as hujjah, as a proof of God on this earth. Do you see? Why? Because they're chosen as the Imams. That wahi is coming down to them, that ilm that is not available to other individuals is given to them, and hence they go and propagate the religion and protect it. And those individuals, for example, who go against the Imams, usurp the rights of the Imam. In reality, they're just not going against the Imam of their time. In reality, what they're doing is that they're going against that natural order of reality that Allah Azza wa Jal has set for the guidance of humankind. So for example, when somebody goes against Imam Hussein or Amir al-Mu'mineen and usurps their right, essentially what they're doing is that they're depriving all of humans of the right guide and Imam and proof of God on earth. And as a result, they're considered as among, for example, the biggest of criminals that you can imagine. They went against the natural order that Allah Azza wa Jal established for humans. Do you see? So the first thing is the reality of human being. That we have two dimensions, physical body and the human soul. The human soul naturally requires do's and don'ts, laws that helps us grow. That's the first step. The second step then it goes that the Ahlul Bayt taught us du'as and ziyarat. For what? For the growth of that human soul. And as a result, the Imams themselves explain, for example, we are individuals where wahi would come down. And we have that knowledge for that natural order of human soul to reach that perfection that you were created for. That's the second thing. Now, this helps us, these preliminaries help us understand the importance of Aza and the Ahlul Bayt. When we see, for example, that the human nature requires that which is good, and the Ahlul Bayt have the access to that perfection that we're talking about, now it makes sense that when the Ahlul Bayt are coming forward and talking about Aza and the importance of Aza and the importance of Matam and the importance of Majlis, so on and so forth, it's because they have access to that knowledge in those higher realms that helps my soul grow and go towards the Ahlul Bayt themselves. Do you see it? And so, for example, when you go to the haram of the Ahlul Bayt, the Imam taught us that. There was no scholar, there was no some random individual who said, listen, I'm going to just go, we're going to start doing ziyarah. No, it was taught by the Ahlul Bayt, ziyarah. Why? It's because once you go for the ziyarah of the Ahlul Bayt, you feel the difference as soon as you enter the haram. Or for example, somebody might come along and they say they'll be sitting in a majlis. This individual, before the majlis and after the majlis, they'll be two different individuals. They'll feel different. Why? The effects of that which the Ahlul Bayt taught, which is good for my human nature, for the human soul, for its growth, is kicking in. It's manifesting itself. Do you see? And so I'll give you an example. Among the scholars that we have in contemporary times was Allama Tabatabai. Some of you guys might have heard this story. But Allama Tabatabai was among the individuals who were urafa and had various students as well. In, for example, Tarbiyat al-Manawi, spiritual guidance, so on and so forth, tafsir. And so Allama would say, for example, when I was working on my tafsir, al-Mizan, my wife, she would come and she would serve me, so on and so forth. And what would happen is this, is that she would say salam to Imam Hussein from Qum to in Karbala. She's in Qum, she's saying salam to Imam Hussein in Karbala. Allama Tabatabai, he says, that when my wife would say salam to Imam Hussein, the response of Imam Hussein, I could hear. Do you see? Why? It's because he has taken his spiritual development according to that which the Ahlul Bayt have taught, to that level where he has now developed this relationship with the Ahlul Bayt. Why? It's that natural order that the human soul has. The human soul requires majalis. The human soul requires azab. The human soul requires, for example, the zikiriyah, this crying that you do. And as a result, you find, for example, we have a book called Kamil Ziyarat, in which it talks about, for example, ziyarah and the greatness and the importance of azab. And it talks about all the imams, for example, the 14 Masumin. Half of that book is about Imam Hussein alayhi salam. That great impact of having majalis for the imam, of how it takes you closer to them. I'll give you another story, another example. Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, one of the Mufassirin in Qum, he recently passed away, he would narrate this. He said he saw it, and I heard this from him. He would say that there was a time, for example, in Qum, it was raining. And this was like maybe a few decades ago. The haram was not too well developed. And so what would happen is that it was raining, and then people, the Za'irin, they would go inside and they would go up to the place where they have shoes, and they would give their shoes to the khadim. And at the counter, there was a mud that was being gathered. They would put their shoes there, and they would take the shoes, they would put it back, give them a token, they would leave. And on the counter, there was a bunch of mud now. And so he says there was a sheikh there, a scholar, and he would go up to the counter and he would take that mud and he would put it on his clothes and his amama. And so one of the khadim, he was standing there, who was serving the Za'irin, taking their shoes. And so he kind of said to, for example, the other khadims, other people who were working there, there's like, the sheikh is a little simple-minded. And so among the other khuddams that were there, other khadims that were there, he told that khadim who made that comment about the sheikh, he said, you know who that person is? He's like, who is that? He said, that's Atullah Behjat. The difference is that the khadim, although very good, he's a khadim, but some of these scholars, they have that understanding. They have developed that relationship that you might think is just mud, but as soon as that mud has become associated with the Ahlul Bayt, even though it's mud, it has shifa in it. Do you see? That mud that you might find it dirty, for example, has now becoming a healing factor for individuals. Why? It's because it has now connected to the Ahlul Bayt. I'll give you another example. Ayatollah Burajardi. A lot of the adults would know the name. He was a contemporary, for example, of Sayyid Khouyi and so on and so forth, before Imam Khomeini. And so in Iran, he had basically an eye issue. He had some trouble with the eyes. And so because he was a marja taqleed, he was famous, a lot of these Za'ireen in Muharram, they would go visit him. And within their culture, they have this, they would take mud, they would have mud, and they would put it on their chest. If you've been to Arba'in, you would see this as well. So they go to his house, and they see Ayatollah Burajardi, they have a meeting with him, and they have mud on there, basically, on the clothing. Ayatollah Burajardi, he goes up to them once the meeting is done, he takes that mud from their chest, and because he has a serious eye problem, he puts it on his eye. And it's been narrated that after that, his eye problem that he had, it was healed. So much so that even those texts that he couldn't read before, due to the font being very small, he was able to restart reading them. Do you see? Why? Because this mud now, all of a sudden, is associated with the Ahlul Bayt. And as a result, when we have all of these rawayat, when the Ahlul Bayt are saying, they go to the majalis, shed a tear. Once you shed a tear, it'll essentially forgive all of your sins. Again, given that you are sincerely seeking forgiveness, it'll forgive your sins. We have other narrations, for example, in which it says that the Ahlul Bayt will teach us that when you go to the majalis of the Ahlul Bayt, it is as if you have visited the Ahlul Bayt. And so the way that the scholars explain these rawayats is that although you might be sitting in a majlis, you might think there's no one there, just like that mud that we're talking about. That somebody might superficially see that mud of the Za'ireen and so on and so forth. That it might not have significant impact in your eyes, but as soon as that mud became associated with the Ahlul Bayt, it becomes a healing factor. Simultaneously, according to these riwayats, according to scholars, is that once you have a majlis for the Ahlul Bayt, when you have a majlis for Imam Hussein alayhi salam, it becomes such that you're visiting the Imam. You're in the presence of the Imam. And simultaneously what happens is that although you may not superficially see what's happening in the majlis, you may just see walls, you may just see a mimbar, you may just see, for example, the carpet, but there are effects manifesting within that gathering. Why? Because it has now become associated with the Ahlul Bayt. It has developed a connection with the Ahlul Bayt. And so when individuals come to these majalis, it's as if they're visiting them. And as a result, they advise individuals, mu'mineen and mu'minat, that once you come to these majalis, be cautious of the hukuk and rights that mu'mineen have over one another. Why? Because you're no longer alone. You're under the supervision of the Ahlul Bayt. What you're seeing superficially is what you're seeing, but now it's connected with the Ahlul Bayt. The Ahlul Bayt are paying attention to what you're doing. There's attention on top of you. You're being supervised. So example I'll give you is this. Recite salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's an example that is given, for example, when we do salam. I say, Assalamu alaikum ya Ahl Bayt al-Nabuwa, so on and so forth. Assalamu alaikum ya Aba Abdullah. This salam that I'm doing, essentially I'm praying for the Ahlul Bayt. I'm saying, listen, may Allah Azza wa Jal have peace upon you. Right? Isn't that what it is? Salam, that's what it is. Question, who am I to pray for the Ahlul Bayt? Who am I to say the Ahlul Bayt, the chosen ones, that I pray for them so they get closer to Allah Azza wa Jal? I have no authority, I have no position for me to be doing that, correct? Because they're ma'soom. But the Ahlul Bayt have taught us this as well. The Ahlul Bayt have taught us, listen, go do salam. Send your salam on us. So how do we reconcile this? And again, there's a big discussion on this. And one of the reasons, and one of the results that they bring forward is this. Is that imagine that you're in this garden and you're a khadim, you're a servant. And that garden is owned by the Ahlul Bayt. And now I go in that garden, I'm working there one day, and I take a flower, I cut the flower, and I take it to the Imams. Now, is there any significant impact on the Ahlul Bayt? That flower, before I gave it to them, belonged to them in the first place, correct? It was theirs to begin with. But me taking that flower, how does that make a difference on them? And so the scholars, the way they explain this concept is this, is that once you take that flower to the Ahlul Bayt, although they already owned it before you gave it to them, because of your action, you now have special attention of the Ahlul Bayt upon you. Although the flower already belonged to them, but the fact that out of your love and sincerity, you took this flower of the Ahlul Bayt to them, this results in you developing this connection with the Ahlul Bayt. Now they're paying attention to you even furthermore. Why? Because of your khulus. Why? Because of your love that you're displaying. And as a result, for example, sometimes you go to these haram, you'll see that some individuals, they actually get shifa. For example, somebody might be paralyzed and they'll walk out of mashhad as if they were normal. Somebody might be blind, they've been given sight. And it's a result of this. When you go and do salam, and when you express this love in the form of aza, the effects of it comes right back onto you, based off of the intensity and the shiddah of your khulus. Do you see it? And so I'll give you one last story, one last example, and then inshallah we'll go towards Messiah. In Qom, there was an event for students from all over the world. And they had asked me for one of the events to come and introduce this qari that was coming. I was responsible for it. So they had told me, listen, this qari is going to come, and there were a bunch of students from all over the world in English-speaking individuals. And they had this gathering for basically these youth and students with this hafiz and this qari. He's a memorizer of the Holy Quran and the reciter of the Holy Quran. His name is Ahmed Dabbagh. You can Google him. Famous. So they asked me, hey, listen, when he comes, you just go downstairs and bring him up. So I was wondering, like, why do I need to go down? Just for logistical purposes. But I went downstairs when he arrived, and there was somebody else who was holding his hand and walking with him. And so when I saw him, I realized that he's blind. And he's been blind for a long time, as in majority of his life. And so then I grab his hand and I take him inside of the hall, and we have him sit. And if you were to speak to him without knowing that he's over the phone, you would not imagine this individual is blind. Just his character, his personality, you wouldn't imagine that this individual is blind. So he went, and the conference and the speech and everything started. And then this qari, Ahmed Dabbagh, he begins to recite the Quran, and he gives them a talk, and it's being translated in English. And then after that, after the recitation, and I'm seeing this firsthand, I'm the witness, I'm seeing this firsthand. He recites everything, he gives a speech, or he gives them a talk, and then after that he opens up the floor for Q&A, question and answers. So now all these individuals who were there, they start testing him. They open up the Quran, and they say, this page, the verse in the very middle of the page, recite it. And he'd start reciting it. Then somebody else said, well, this page, the last verse on this page, he'd recite that as well. This page, at the very top, the first verse, and he'd recite it. He had it completely memorized, but he's blind. Whatever question you can imagine, make it as difficult as possible, they were asking him. Once he was done with all of this qari now, he says something, and I still remember this. He says, I'm blind, and I've always been blind. But the Ahlul Bayt did jubran of my blindness. The Ahlul Bayt compensated for my blindness. Do you see? Is that whatever you do for the Ahlul Bayt, even though I'm blind, whatever else they gave me, it compensated for the fact that I can't see. And you could feel, for example, the love and the khulus from this individual when talking about the Ahlul Bayt. He can't see, but you can imagine that he has been compensated, whatever he was given, whatever it may be, so to the point that he can't see anything. Not his family, not his children, nobody. But he's been compensated for. And so when you do this aza, a lot of people ask, even for example, the youth, and as a result, some of them might just do it out of not knowing much, for example. They might say, for example, what is the point of this? Why can't we just have a lecture and not have a musibah? Why must we do matam? And it requires explanation, but simultaneously, this azah that we have whatever you do, matam, poetry, marsiya, whatever it may be, it's being compensated for. There's jubran for this. And if you want to look at the best example on the eve of Ashur, Imam Hussein said, listen, they want me. You can leave. You will not be questioned. Even if you leave, you will not be questioned in the akhirah. It's okay. He had opened up. He's at that position. He's at that level where he's saying, listen, even if you leave me right now, I'm giving you my word that in the hereafter, this will not be accounted for you leaving. Imagine that position. Imagine that position, for example, the mud that we spoke about. As soon as it becomes associated with the Ahlul Bayt, it reaches that level of becoming a healing factor. Now you as a human being, which was created as the greatest creation of Allah Azza wa Jal, as soon as you associate yourself with the Ahlul Bayt in your day-to-day lives, beyond Muharram and Safar, 12 days every day, 12 months every day, you too then essentially can reach that level, for example, that we're talking about, where you say salam and you can hear it right back. Where you develop this connection with the Ahlul Bayt that even though, for example, you may not physically see them, but you have developed this understanding that you may come to a majalis, but you'll feel that this is a special place. And so, for example, there was a time, I can't remember from the top of my head, there's a rawaya in which, for example, somebody goes up to the Imam. It was either Imam Bargah or Imam Sadiq, they were sitting in the masjid. And they're talking about imama and how people, for example, don't understand the imam their time and how they're neglectful towards the imams. And so the imam was explaining essentially a few things. And he said, if you want to know someone who has ma'rifah of the Ahlul Bayt, of their imam, go ask that individual sitting in the corner of the masjid in some place. So this individual, one of these companions, he goes and finds this individual who's sitting in that particular place. And once he reaches that place, he sees that this man, he's blind. He can't see. And so he asks this blind man, he's like, do you know where the imam of your time is? He's like, yeah, I know where he is. He's like, where is he? He's like, he's in the masjid right now. So although he can't see it superficially, the relationship that he has developed with the Ahlul Bayt is such that he can feel their presence. And everything then just changes. Your worldview, how you live your life, how you behave, how you talk, how you walk, everything. And this is the greatness of this azah. It completely transforms a human being. It's a very lengthy discussion, although we can fit it in 45 minutes, essentially. But this is just the nutshell, and we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg right now. But what we have in the form of azah is one of the biggest blessings that you have. That somebody, for example, simply knowing religion intellectually is one thing, but feeling it is another. And azah helps with that. Somebody might not be, for example, a religious individual, but as soon as they come up to the majalis, they'll feel that change. They'll feel that change. Why? It's that one tear that it came in the love of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So much so that we have within our rawayas that if somebody cries and does ziyarah, it has, for example, the ajr of a hajj, for example, or more than that. Explaining the shiddah, the intensity, that the effects that azah has over a human being, of how to completely transform somebody and make them a companion of the imams. Do you see it? And this is one of the ways, or one of the reasons, or relationship between Ahlul Bayt and azah. Recite salawat. Allahumma salli Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajal faraj. And you see the caravan of Imam Hussein alayhi salam after Karbala displaying this azah from the very beginning. From Imam Sajjad alayhi salam to Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, salamullah alayha, even the children that were there. Maqtal writes that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, once everyone was martyred and time came about to say his last farewell, he went into the tent of Sayyid Sajjad alayhi salam. He bid his farewell to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. And then after that, he went into the tents where all the ladies were. Habib ibn Muslim writes that we saw Imam Hussein had got into the tents And it had been a while before he had come back outside, as in he wasn't coming back outside. And so Habib ibn Muslim, he says, I went closer to the tent to see just exactly what is happening. And he says, when I went near the tent where Imam Hussein was, I saw something strange. I saw that Imam Hussein, whenever he wanted to leave the tents, the children would wrap themselves around the legs of the Imam and wouldn't let him leave. The children wouldn't let them leave. Why? Because they've seen Ali Akbar go to the battlefield. They've seen Ali Asghar go. They've seen Hazrat Abbas go. They've seen Qasim or Muhammad go. And now when Imam Hussein, he comes back outside, he gets on the horse, and as soon as he begins to move forward, he hears a little girl saying, Baba, Baba, slow down. She says, Baba, slow down. And Imam Hussein, he looks back and it's his 4-year-old daughter, Sakina. Sakina comes up to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and she says, Baba, if you have decided to go, then you can go. But before you go, I just want you to do one thing. Imam Hussein says, what do you need? She says, Baba, come down to the ground. And so Imam Hussein, he gets off the horse. And then she says to him, Baba, I want you to sit on the ground. Can you sit on the ground? So Imam Hussein sits on the ground. Then Sakina says, Baba, I'm going to sit on your lap. And then she sits on his lap. And then she asks him, oh Baba, can you hold me to your chest one last time? Could you hold me like an orphan? How would you hold an orphan? And it was this Sakina that on the day of Ashura, after that, she doesn't see her Baba. And then she's taken from Karbala to Kufa to Sham, and in the dungeons of Sham, the Maqatal write that she was there in the dungeons, and then in their last moments, she was asleep and she wakes up and she begins to cry. She begins to cry, and what happens is that Bibi Zainab, she comes up to Sakina and she tries to console her. Then Imam Sajjad comes, he tries to console her. Then Sakina says, oh my uncle, oh my brother, I have seen a dream. I saw in the dream that there are a bunch of ladies wearing black clothing descending from the sky. And so in the dream I asked, who are these ladies? They said, this is Asiya, this is Maryam. And they would explain who each Bibi is. And then she would say that I saw a Bibi who was among them, who was crying the most, And so I asked, who is this lady who is crying the most? They said, this is your grandmother, the mother of your father, the mother of Hussein. And so Sakina says, in my dream, I go up to my grandmother. I says, oh my grandmother, this ummah has oppressed us so much. I wonder what else, maybe that when she got the head of her father, what she said to it. Maybe she said, oh Baba, on the day of Ashur, when you left, look how you left me. But now look at me. I have bruises on my cheeks. My clothes are burnt. My ears are bruised. مات مع حسين.
करते हैं मातम हरम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का। करते हैं मातम हरम अब्बास का, हो गया मरना सितम अब्बास का। करते हैं मातम हरम अब्बास का। कहते थे कमर थाम के ये सैयद अबरार, हाय अलमदार, हाय अलमदार, हाय अलमदार। ये حال ہے لاشے کا سنبھالا نہیں جاتا، سنبھالا نہیں جاتا، تیر آنکھ سے بھائی کی نکالا نہیں جاتا، نکالا نہیں جاتا، امداد کو آ جائیے یا حیدر کرار، ہائے علمدار، زینب نے تیری آس پہ چھوڑا تھا مدینہ، چھوڑا تھا مدینہ، میں کیسے بتاؤں اسے سکائے سکینہ، سکائے سکینہ، مارا گیا زینب تیری چادر کا نگہدار، ہائے علمدار، ہائے علمدار، ارے تم قتل ہوئے غم پہ بھی چل جائے گی شمشیر، چل جائے گی شمشیر، اغیار میں رہ جائے گی تنہا میری غمشی، تنہا میری غمشی، زینب کی ردا بچنے کے باقی نہیں آثار، ہائے اللہ، ارے بازو بھی قلم ہو گئے اے بازو شبیر، اے بازو شبیر، ٹکڑے گئے بدن آنکھ میں پیوست ہوا تھی، پیوست ہوا تھی، کس نے یہ میری ماں کی دعاؤں پہ کیا وار، ہائے جس طرح سے گھر لائے تھے مسجد سے علی کو، مسجد سے علی کو، اس طرح سے لے جائیں گے خیمے میں جری کو، خیمے میں جری کو، اکبر میرے بھائی کا جنازہ کرو تیار، ہائے متوجہ زیارت۔ السلام علیکم ابا عبداللہ الحسین، السلام علیکم ابن رسول اللہ، السلام علیکم والا جدی کا و ابیک، السلام علیکم والا امی کا و اختی کا و اخیک، السلام علیکم ورحمت اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکم یا غریب الغرباء، السلام علیکم یا معین الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام علیکم یا شمس الشموس یا انیس النفوس، ایوہ المدفون بیرزتوس، الراضی بالقدر والقضاء ورحمت اللہ وبرکاتہ، السلام علیکم یا صاحب العصر والزمان، الامان 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 من فتنة الزمان، السلام علیکم یا شریک القرآن، السلام علیکم یا مظہر الایمان، سیدی اجل اللہ تعالی فرجک، وسال اللہ تعالی مخرجک وزغورک، وجعلنا من انصارک واوانک، السلام علیکم ورحمت اللہ وبرکاتہ۔
مومن مرکزی امام بارگاہ المرتضیٰ میں مجلس ٹھیک بعد نماز مغربین شروع ہو جاتی ہے اور ٹھیک 9:30 بجے مولانا زبی ممبر ہوتے ہیں۔ آپ لوگوں سے درخواست ہے کہ پابندی وقت کے ساتھ شریک ہوں۔ مومنین، کل مرکزی امام بارگاہ المرتضیٰ میں مجلس برسیہ خانی تحت اللفظ ہوگی اور بذات